Alright, hi guys, welcome to our lesson on the pituitary gland. If you remember in our previous lesson on the posterior lobe, we say that the posterior lobe is made up of nervous tissues, and these neurosecretory cells are also known as pituicytes, and they produce two main hormones: antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. And then we say that the supraoptic nuclei produces ADH, where we say the ADH is responsible for regulation of blood volume. How? By helping the kidneys to reabsorb water. And then it also helps to reduce the osmotic pressure, which is the viscosity or the thickness of the blood. So those are the functions of ADH. We also say that they also have vasoconstrictive function, that is, they help to constrict blood vessels. Okay, so those are the stimulatory aspects, or what stimulate the release of ADH from the posterior lobe. And then we also talk about the oxytocin, which is actually produced by this group of nuclei, this particular one, paraventricular nuclei in the hypothalamus, and then passed on through this tract. Okay, and then this hormone is released via positive feedback mechanism by the stretching of the cervical or the cervix. Okay, and then it stimulates the smooth muscle of the uterus, causing increased contraction, and then thereby aiding in labor. Okay, then the second function of oxytocin, we mentioned that it also helps in the removal of breast milk. I think a better word to use is breast milk expression. Okay, all right. So that is that about oxytocin and then everything about the posterior. But just to let you know, because this is the hypothalamus, and then remember the pituitary gland is also known as the hypophysis. We can call this the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. Remember, we say these guys are tracts, right? This is a tract, all right? It's a tract. So we can call this is hypothalamus, this is the hypophysis. So this is hypothalamo, right? Hypophyseal tract. Okay? So all of this region, that is, in case you see that mentioned. Now, but we are going to be focusing on the anterior pituitary gland now. And I want you to know that the anterior pituitary gland is made up of some cuboidal epithelial cells, globular epithelial cells. And then it is actually, it is formed from the pharynx. Okay? It is formed from the pharynx, so it's like an upward growth of the epithelial lining of the pharynx that actually form the anterior pituitary gland. Then remember, with this one we say this is a downward growth, that is the posterior, while this is an upward growth of the pharynx. Now it is made up of the portal system. When we talk about portal system, a portal system have two system of capillaries. You have the primary capillary here, right, that receives some forms of releasing hormones. Then you now have the secondary system. Okay, now so this particular blood vessel is known as the portal vein. Okay, well, because it is because this is located within the hypophysis, we can now call it the hypophyseal portal system. Okay, hypophyseal portal system, because it is located within the pituitary gland, and is a portal system because it has two capillary network or two capillary beds. Okay, now so within the hypothalamus, right, some hormones are secreted, and these hormones are usually regulatory hormones. Okay, so let's look at the first group of hormone that is produced here. Let's say prolactin, sorry, let's say prolactin releasing hormone. Okay, now this prolactin releasing hormone that is produced by some cells or nuclei within the hypothalamus is secreted into the primary portal system. So let's assume we have this secreted into this pathway, and this comes to this cell, right? The name of this cell is known as mammotroph, right? Mammotroph. So it acts on some receptors on these cells and then cause the release of what? Prolactin. What did I just say? That in the hypothalamus, some nuclei produces prolactin releasing hormone or prolactin releasing factor, which enters the primary portal system and then transported through the hypophyseal portal system, right? And then this prolactin releasing hormone acts on some group of cells, right? These cells are called mammotroph, right? They bind with some receptors on the surface of these cells, and then they causes the release of what? Prolactin. Now, prolactin acts on the mammary gland, okay? It acts on what? On the breast. Now, usually, this happens shortly after birth, right? It happens shortly after birth, and then it stimulates the cells, particularly the acini cells, okay? Particularly the acini cell to produce milk, and that process is known as lactation. So basically, the function of prolactin is it has to do with milk production, okay? So that is that about the first hormone that we are looking at. Remember, we said that the anterior or the adenohypophysis produce 5 different types of hormone. So we have looked at the first hormone, which is prolactin, and usually it helps to produce milk or lactation. Now, the next hormone that is released. Okay, now let's talk about the inhibition, right? If we don't need breast milk production, what is now the inhibitory factor? Is dopamine, right? Dopamine. Or you can call it prolactin inhibiting hormone. So you can either call it dopamine or prolactin inhibiting hormone. These guys inhibit the production of prolactin. So let's assume in a non-gravid woman that is not breastfeeding, she's not, definitely don't expect the woman to produce prolactin. So in that case, this will stay inhibited. And what will cause this cell to be inhibited? Prolactin inhibiting hormone or dopamine. All right, I guess that is that about prolactin. Let's move to the next group of cell, which is the next hormone that is produced is the next cell that is produced here is thyroid releasing hormone. Okay, thyroid releasing hormone. This thyroid releasing hormone is also secreted by some nuclei within the hypothalamus, and then they enter into the primary portal system, and then they are drained, okay? And then they also come to what? To these cells here. These cells are called thyrotrophs. What are these cells called? They are called thyrotrophs. Okay, now these cells, thyrotrophs, actually produces thyroid stimulating hormone. What do they produce? They produce TSH. We'll look at this in detail when we're looking at the thyroid gland. Okay, so to produces what? Thyroid stimulating hormone. This thyroid stimulating hormone acts on the follicular cells. Okay, act on the follicular cells of the thyroid gland to produce T3, which is triiodothyronine, and then T4, which is thyroxine. So basically, the function of TSH is to stimulate those cells of the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormones. Now, when we have high levels of thyroid hormone, like when we have high levels of T3 and T4, by negative feedback mechanism. Okay, this mechanism will be inhibited, and then we are going to have another factor produced, which is thyroid inhibiting hormone. Okay, now this will not inhibit this pathway. Okay, so that means thyroid trough will not be stimulated again. If thyroid trough are not stimulated, we won't have the production of TSH. Okay, so this mechanism in which when we have low thyroid hormones, TSH is produced. Okay, and if we have high amount of thyroid hormones, TSH is inhibited. It's known as negative feedback mechanism. So basically, we know that the function of thyroid hormones is they help to regulate metabolism and basically control some metabolic processes. We'll look at that, as I said, in our lectures on the thyroid gland. Now let's look at the third cell, which is this cell. This cell is known as corticotrophs. Okay, they are known as corticotrophs, and the cells that produce some group of cells within the hypothalamus, right, produce this particular type of hormone, which is CRH. Okay, I guess this place is kind of clumsy. Let me just reduce it. Okay, so CRH. CRH stands for corticotrophin releasing hormones. Corticotrophin releasing hormone are secreted, right, into this portal system, right, and then they are taken to these cells. This is corticotroph. Okay, and when this happens, this corticotroph releases another hormone known as ACTH, which is adrenocorticotrophin hormone, adrenocorticotrophic hormone. Okay, so what did I say again? That the hypothalamus, right, some cells in the hypothalamus produce corticotrophin releasing hormone, which passes through the hypophyseal portal system, okay, and then acts on some cell which are known as collectively known as corticotrophs. This corticotroph produces what? ACTH, which is adrenocorticotrophic hormones. Now, this group of hormones act on the adrenal gland. Okay, the adrenal gland has three regions: the zona glomerulosa, fasciculator, and the reticularis. So basically, this adrenocorticotrophic hormone acts on the adrenal cortex and then help to release those specific hormones, which are aldosterone, glucocorticoid, and then sex hormone. Okay, so that is basically the function of these guys. And then when we are looking at the adrenal gland again, we'll look at all of these, the functions of these specific hormones in depth. So by negative feedback again, if we have cases where we have too much of these steroid hormones in the body, it will stimulate the hypothalamus again, and then this time around we are not going to have corticotrophin releasing hormone, we are going to have corticotrophin inhibiting hormones, okay, which will actually inhibit all of these pathways. All right, so basically that is that about the anterior pituitary gland. Remember, we are supposed to have five cells. So we'll look at the remaining two later on, but just know that for this we have three basic releasing hormones from the hypothalamus, and this causes stimulation of some specific cells within the anterior pituitary gland. For mammotroph produces prolactin, which stimulates breast milk production. Then for thyrotroph causes the release of TSH that act on the thyroid gland to produce more T3 and T4. Then for corticotroph produces ACTH, adrenocorticotrophic hormone, that actually acts on the adrenal cortex. All right, so see you in our next lesson.